Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to From the Chair Where Inclusion Matters with your host, Nathan Knopf.
How you doing, everybody? Uh, I'd like to say welcome to our guest tonight, uh, legendary WCWC manager and manager of the hottest, literally and figuratively, faction right now, Hellbound. Mr. Tubbs, how are you tonight, sir?
I'm doing all right. Life is good. Life is very good.
And Pat's here too. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I gotta be here.
So
Just for
our
that
first
host,
question.
mystery question.
Oh yeah, okay, mystery question. Okay, about an hour ago, I watched a cryptic message from the Rat King about April 29th. He just kept repeating himself. Was he just abducted or what's going on? They said they haven't seen or heard from him since.
Well, I honestly do not have an answer for you on that. I mean, myself and the Rat King, we've traveled a lot of miles together, but he has not discussed anything with me the last couple weeks. And when I saw that earlier tonight, I was as surprised as anybody else. In Pacific Northwest Blue Collar Wrestling, I am currently the general manager. So I am not in Hellbound's corner on the last show, and I won't be in their corner on this show. So I'm kind of out of the loop, and it's concerning me as much as anybody else.
Yeah. So our first question, other than the mystery one, was how was Hellbound formed?
Oh, that's a bit of a story. Okay, so any of you guys, do you remember Cool Heels at all?
Yes.
There's a very similar story there. Um, it literally, in both cases, was a group of guys who were already traveling together, sometimes different places, who just decided to see what they could do and where they could go as a group. I mean, in professional wrestling nowadays, it's mostly you go to a place, the promoters or the bookers, they tell you what it is they want you to do, and that's what you're doing. But we wondered what would happen if you had several guys who are collectively traveling together, sharing expenses, helping each other get bookings as a group to see where that could go. In this case, it was as COVID was winding down and places were starting to open back up. You know, the Rat King, we had a lot of time to think about how we were coming back. And Rat King wanted to have a totally different look, totally different attitude, something that nobody in the Pacific Northwest was really doing. And as his manager, I mean, I don't know if you guys know this, but I've been running with Rat King since he was in training. That's like almost 9 years now where I've been around him. And most of that time I've been in his corner as his manager. When does that happen in wrestling anymore? But we were presenting this new image. First time we showed it was down in Rubble in the Redwoods a couple years ago. And almost accidentally, during a match between Rat King and Gregor Petrov, it's like the idea lit. Literally, as they were, getting ready to fight, and then during the match, the idea of, well, Russian Hellhound, Rat King, it's a natural fit. And then a few weeks later, the same thing with Draven Vargas. And as a group, we clicked almost as soon as we started sharing ideas. And for some of us, that led to last year, 2022, being one of the busiest years we've had. And it was mostly as a group, except for a few isolated places like, Draven's in DOA and the rest of us aren't. But most places we were running as a group, helping each other get bigger and better and more noticed. And I mean, you saw how it is. Everybody out here, they know Hellbound now.
And a lot of times that's how the best factions are formed, is that organic, formation, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it allows us to be in different places. Instead of having a faction in one group where they're in control, we kind of said, hey, we can come down to you as a group in the same car and make ourselves useful or take over. That's happened a couple times too.
Well, I can see that.
Who is your Mount Rushmore of managers?
Oh, managers. Well, I mean, I could be stupid and I could say myself, but no, easily Bobby Heenan would be there. And that's a hard one, narrowing it down to 4. But Bobby Heenan would definitely be there. I would say J.J. Dillon would have to. I'd have to put Jimmy Hart there. I'm not going to say he's one of my absolute favorites, but he would have to be there. And gosh, last one I would say Paul Bearer, Percy Pringle. I know in WWF, WWE, he only managed certain people, but outside of that, he had already built a name for himself before he ever went to WWF. And I take that into account too. I watched a lot of World Class back when I was younger, and Percy Pringle was all over World Class. So that would be my 4. It's a hard one though, because there's a couple others I can think of that could be there. I mean, Sherry Martel was excellent.
Go ahead, Pat. You got the next one too.
Uh-oh.
Who were your wrestling heroes growing up?
Oh, my wrestling heroes growing up. Well, I know this is probably going to be a weird thing to say, but I actually didn't start watching wrestling until I was around 17. I just didn't key into it right away. When I first started, though, the ones that got my attention most were mostly the heels. Ravishing Rick Rude. I was watching repeats of World Class while he was starting his climb in WWF. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard in WCW, NWA at the time. They caught my attention like immediately. Kurt Hennig, I saw him in some AWA stuff, so I already knew his face when he showed his face first time in WWF. Those are probably 4 of the guys that caught me right away. I loved Demolition. I've always loved tag teams. Demolition and the Rockers and Arn and Tully were immediately on the top of the guys that I like to watch. And when I started wrestling myself, it was some of those guys that it was their matches I was watching to kind of learn what I wanted to do. Because I knew I wasn't going to go out there like the 6'8", 400-pound muscle guys and do what they do. Not with my body.
And Pat, since you like the cookie question, I'll let you take that one too.
My favorite snack is cookies. What is your favorite snack or cookie?
My favorite snack or cookie? You know who you're talking to? This is Al Tubbs. I've been dealing with money for a long time. It's steak, it's lobster, it's caviar.
Everyone that we ask that question to, I like yours the best.
Gotta have style in this business. I suppose with Hellbound, though, I should have those things flambe.
Ooh. What was it like working with Hammerstone and Jacob Fatu in WCWC?
Well, I never worked with Jacob Fatu, so I can't say anything about that. Hammerstone is an interesting character. I'm not going to say any like locker room stories or whatever, but he was pretty new when I first met him, and we worked a few times along the way. Not a lot. I wasn't out there against him in too many matches, but I don't want to say we knew he was going to get up there immediately, but I knew he could do more than a lot of stronger guys his size. I mean, there are a lot of men who have the muscular builds and who work at those muscular builds who can't really do as much. You know, they do the strong guy style because that's what they can do. But Hammerstone, sometimes, you know, he could impress. He could do things that a lot of guys his size could not or were afraid to do. You know, dives over the top rope and things like that. So, you know, we were never close friends, but I was impressed by some of the things he could do. I've known a lot of big guys who couldn't do some of the things he can, and that he still can do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jacob Fatu, sorry, but I've never met him.
Including your group now, can you list your top 5 factions?
Top 5 factions? Well, I'm not going to list mine because that'd be cheating. But, I mean, the Heenan family, when I first started watching wrestling, the Heenan family had a lot of my favorite guys, whether or not, you know, that was because of Heenan. I mean, they had a lot of my favorites. So automatically, he's got to be on the list. I'd be a fool if I didn't say the Four Horsemen. They're one of the original big factions that kind of made factions hot, I guess you could say. Let's see, top 5. Wow, it's going back a long ways. The Pringle Dynasty, because the same way down in World Class, he had a bunch of my favorite guys too. Some of the same guys that crossed into WWF and became big stars went through there and had him in their corner. So I would say that. Let's see, Dangerous Alliance. Again, some of my favorite guys together. So you always have to include that. Let me see. Gosh, after that, it's kind of hard. I mean, there's a bunch of them. I'm not going to say NWO. They were good for a while, but they kind of very quickly had too many guys and were trying to fry too many, you know, had too many fires going. It got weird fast. Honestly, I would have to think about who the number 5 would be. You know, there's too many in my brain, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. And that's the thing, is I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. Like, I'm trying to remember TNA. I watched them for years, and there's somebody that I'm not quite remembering. Legacy?
There was Fortune, which was like Ric Flair's one where he brought in AJ Styles.
That's probably the one I'm thinking of. You know, I threw out Legacy because that kind of sounded familiar, but yeah, I remember them too. A couple others. Those were good times.
What did you learn from the grappler in the WCWC?
Now there's a loaded question. For one, you deal with the grappler. I mean, have any of you seen the grappler's the history comedy type routines he does?
Mm-hmm.
You spend any time with the grappler in a learning environment, you're gonna get that like 100 times over. Like, I can't even remember all the stories that he told us. But for me, you know, to take a look past the curtain, when I met well, not the first time I met the grappler. I first met him at Portland Uncut, behind the scenes. I was trying to get into there just as it folded. Oops. When I first met Grappler, I had just returned to WC. I had been there a few years before, and I was just returning. Did not know the Grappler was about to take over the school, the wrestling school. And being like the only guy at that time who was trying to become a manager, because I figured my wrestling days were pretty much over except for the occasional gimmick match kind of stuff. He kind of took me under his wing. He did a lot of one-to-one stuff with me and a lot of having me out there during training matches and stuff where I would do whatever I was doing, and then he would pull me to the side after he talked with the wrestlers and told me, well, these are the things you can do better. So I had that direct training from him for like 2.5 years. And whatever I thought I knew before that started was nothing compared to what he taught me. And I'm going to always appreciate that. The biggest thing he taught me, and one of the first things he said to me, one of the biggest things he said is, He was going to teach me and show me when to be front and center and drawing attention to myself and when not to be. You guys watch enough matches with like valets or managers that don't really know what they're doing, you'll see them distracting the fans when something important is going down in the ring. And I was told not to do that. If the wrestlers are wrestling, if they're going fast paced, if they're doing stuff, I try to be as invisible as I possibly can. When the match slows down, or honestly, if the audience starts getting a little too quiet, then I move. I start doing what I know how to do. And that was a very, very important lesson that I learned, hopefully early enough.
Who are your top 5 heels in wrestling?
Right now? Or
Yeah.
just forever?
In general.
Okay.
Yeah, either or.
Because I'll admit, I'm not up on all wrestling these days, so that'd be a hard press thing for me. Most of my favorites are going to be older guys, so got to bear with me. I would say my number one, I already mentioned him earlier, is Ravishing Rick Rude. There aren't, I mean, even amongst all the great heels, how many of them got that reaction from a stadium? I mean, you look at guys like Ric Flair, you look at, all the greats, and a lot of them could not just walk out and command everybody in a stadium. Rick Rude could. He could go out there with people that didn't know who he was, and by the time he was doing his thing in the ring, before the other guy ever came out, he had everybody against him. And that's incredible. That is just incredible. Let's see. My best heels: Macho Man Randy Savage. I mean, he's up there with Rude. I mean, nobody can deny when he was a heel, he was one of the best there was. Which amazingly, he could also be a great face. A lot of guys couldn't do that. Rick Rude never really took many chances to be face, and he was never that as good when he was. Savage, he could do both pretty easily, it seemed. I mean, I don't know, never met him, but it looked like he made it easy than a lot of people. Let me see. Heels. Gosh, there's so many of them. I mentioned Kurt Hennig. He was always one of my favorites. Let me see. I should go over to WCW a couple times too, huh? Oh. Dick Slater. I don't know how many people, there's a lot of folks who don't even remember Slater when he was at his best. But in the age of YouTube and the internet, I've watched a lot of like 1980 to 1988, the stuff that was going on before I started watching and not in WWE, not in the big companies. And Dick Slater impresses me almost every single time I watch a match of his. I mean, he was just good. I'm amazed that his name isn't up there with some of the big ones like Savage and some of the greats, because he could make anybody look good and he could make people hate him while he was doing it. Let's see. I should pick at least one person newer, shouldn't I? Oh, you know what, though? I'm going to say Steve Austin, when he was heel, before he became everybody's favorite guy. I mean, I'm including WCW too, but even after he went to WWE, before he went face, he was excellent. He could do so much without ever, before he did the cheating, before he insulted people or whatever, he really had a flair with just taking over and getting people to not like him, until he became too big where everybody liked him anyways. I mean, he did reach a point where even when he was trying to be heel, the fans just didn't really take to it. So, but there are so many good ones. It's hard to narrow it down to 5.
In all the places that you've managed, what has been the craziest crowd you've ever been in front of?
Craziest crowd I've ever been in front of. Now, are we talking crazy like people who are just into the show, or crazy where weird stuff happened? Because that's two different things.
Let's go with the weird stuff. I kind of like those stories. So
I have to go back a ways. Okay. This goes back to when I was wrestling in the Midwest back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Because I know you guys probably don't know that, but that's where I got my start, was Michigan. Went through some very bad trainers before I found a good guy who was willing to take me under his wing for a while. But one of those early shows, like a year and a half when I was into it, was on a show where there were some people there who were just really, really into it. And sometimes I think they didn't quite understand yet how much of wrestling wasn't like real. And there was a night I had wrestled, and I was at the time one of the more hated guys, even though I was relatively new. I kind of knew how to get the crowd against me. And we had a group of guys at that time, including Adam Pierce. And it was during he was out there with two other guys. One was a Michigan local, and another was Adrian Lynch, who I don't know if he wrestled that long after that. I know it was early 2000s, and they got the crowd so riled up that when Lynch got too close to this old lady, she maced him. And
wow,
we didn't know it right away, but that stuff doesn't stay in a little location. So I was out at ringside at the time. Besides doing the wrestling part, I was doing commentary part of the night too. So I was out there, and it's like you just started smelling, and then my sinuses and my throat start feeling like they're closing up on me, and I'm hearing other people in front of me in the audience starting to do this, and we're just like, what the hell? And then I heard that somebody had pulled mace out, and I'm like, freaking Christ, what the hell? Somebody got mad enough to mace one of the wrestlers? And yeah, I've seen some weird things, but that's got to be, somewhere on the top of the list of things that I've personally witnessed, and in this case, actually breathed and choked on. I mean, I'm trying to do commentary, and I'm over there.
Wow.
She got
wow. So before you ask your next question, Pat, I'll do the next mystery question just because it confuses you guys. So can you tell us how the match between Hellbound and High Five came about, and how did the loser by drink stipulation happen at Metal Mania?
Well, obviously, if you were there, I wasn't. So, but Metal Mania and Anarcho Pro, they're a little bit different than your typical promotions. They're open to some really wild stuff and doing things. I mean, a lot of the folks that are going to those aren't hardcore wrestling crowds. If we went in there and just did normal wrestling matches, they might not enjoy them as much. And I mean, when it comes to brains coming up with ideas, I'm going to tell you, Draven is one of the masters. And Petrov and Pat, Large and Rat King, I mean, we all put a lot of input into these things. And I mean, at this point, Hellbound's been around a while. High Five has been around even longer. Of course, we share Draven Vargas. He gets around. He swings with all of us. So, I mean, I don't know whose idea it was initially, but it was an idea that was instantly liked by all of us because it's something nobody would have expected. It would draw attention, and it would be a wild, crowd-pleasing match, regardless of what went down. And it got attention. I mean, there were the people there for that match, and it was something they used to promote that show quite a bit. Just making sure everybody knew who the four were and how wild it was going to be.
Yep. And for the record, Hellbound actually won that match.
Well, I mean, half of us did.
Yeah, which was kind of funny. Yeah, it was kind of funny. The Rat King and Draven were the two that took the pin. Yeah. Yeah.
Who are your top 5 faces in wrestling?
Top 5 faces. That's probably going to be a little harder. When you say top 5, understand that I go for who my favorites were. I know if I were to say a list, 5 out of probably 8 or 9 guys would probably come up over and over. So I picked the people I liked personally as faces. Sometimes some of them are going to be a little different. Probably one of my favorite faces is Ricky Steamboat. Dude was phenomenal with what he did. I don't remember ever seeing him as a heel, so it's hard to even compare what he would have been like as a heel. But he was hot. He had the fans with him every single run. And his run with Ric Flair, I mean, Ric Flair had a long, glorious career as a wrestler, and so did Steamboat. But their matches for the WCW, NWA World title, they're some of the best pure wrestling matches WCW ever had, unless you go back to like Harley Race and Dusty Rhodes and stuff. But pure overall matches, those matches were great. And so I love Ricky Steamboat for that. I absolutely love him. I'll put 2 of them together as if they're a single because it was a tag team. I told you once I loved my tag teams. They were a lot of my favorite matches are tag team matches. I loved the Rockers when they were the Rockers in WWF. It didn't matter who they were wrestling. They knew what they were doing, and they could make anybody look good. I really wish the one time they won the WWF title wasn't reversed. That would have been nice to see. But shenanigans, right? Like real life shenanigans. Let me see. I mean, I always liked Bret Hart as a face. He could do the heel stuff too, but he was one of my favorites when he was running as a singles competitor. Let me see. Trying to think. I don't know if this counts as face the way we're thinking about it, but most of the time he was popular in his own country. So, oh gosh, now I'm trying to forget his name. Terrible. I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one because now the name is messing with me. But a Japanese wrestler was one of the greats. And he was always popular. Even when he tried to be heel, he was always popular. And let's see, who else? Should I? You know what? I'm gonna go out on a limb here and go with somebody who I knew personally and who I dearly miss in wrestling. If you guys were watching WC, you know him. For all the young guys I ever knew in wrestling, Marcus Malone was one of the most natural faces I've ever personally seen. He caught on so fast how to get an audience on his side and how to keep them there and how to keep them invested in a match, like the entire matches. And the one time I saw somebody try to turn him heel, for the fact that we're just talking local Oregon wrestling, nobody bought it. I don't remember any fans buying it. And they had to reverse that and come up with an excuse for it right away. Because, I mean, I loved Marcus Malone work. And I might be a little biased because I worked against him in probably 50 matches in those early years, different promotions. But, yeah, he was naturally such a good face. I mean, he's somebody who could have eventually been the top face in most companies that he could have graced his presence with.
What was it like working with Gangrel and WCWC?
Oh, hell, Gangrel. Interesting question. Gangrel, I mean, most of the time when I was out there, I was against him. So I'm not going to tell you he's my favorite guy. I'm not going to tell you we've ever been friends. But you don't come away from an interaction with Gangrel without learning something. And even in the locker rooms, I remember him willing to let younger wrestlers pick his brain, ask him questions. He would watch matches that he wasn't involved with and then talk to the guys in the match afterwards, letting them know you could have done this better, or this didn't really work, or this didn't look so good. Especially when it comes to interacting with fans. It's something that a lot of young wrestlers forget because they're so busy trying to, make sure they're going to win or whatever. And they forget that they've got to connect. They've got to look around. They've got to see. And I mean, Gangrel, pretty much during the entire time he was with WC, he was doing a lot of stuff in the background. And you got to appreciate that. He didn't just come and wrestle a match, get a paycheck. He was involved, and you could feel it. And he brought the locker room up, brought the morale up.
What would be your dream match to manage? Where would it be? Who would be involved? And what would the outcome be?
Dream match, huh? Well, I'm going to tell you. I don't want to. I'm not going to give out very many big secrets or anything here. I think my days of thinking, oh, well, I'd love to manage, Roman Reigns against blah blah blah. And I think my days of that kind of dreaming are done long ago, because I know stuff like that isn't going to happen. But knowing the people involved and knowing how much it would mean to certain people, I would love to be at ringside and be in the corner of the Rat King if and when he ever gets to wrestle Danhausen. I mean, that would be a hot match, and it's something that he has wanted before Danhausen was a name that was known across the United States. When he was still indie darling, just starting to rise, Rat King knew who he was and would have loved to have a chance at him. And if it happens, I would love to be part of that, just because then I'd be able to be there and see it firsthand. Because, of course, my seat in the house is usually better than any other seat as far as watching the match. If the match is good enough, sometimes I have to remind myself that I've got a job when I'm out there.
So before we ask the next question, we want to thank our first sponsor, which is the CARE program, which stands for Community Action Reaching Everybody. And if you're interested in that, you can contact Becky Bernhardt on Facebook.
So, is the next question yours, Nathan?
Yes.
Good, Mr. Question.
Can you tell us something about your career that a lot of fans don't know about you, that when they hear it, they would say, oh my God?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. Gosh, that is a hard one. I'm not one that usually, something that nobody would know, or that they would say, oh my gosh. Okay, yeah, I've got something. This isn't a big thing. There are things that might be considered bigger depending on who. But if a lot of the folks here were watching WCWC, there was a time before I had ever made my first appearance on television, but I was training with the grappler to be the manager, and I did various other jobs, okay? Now, there are two things I can bring up from that time period. A, there were a few spots at the live shows where they would bring out, where somebody was out in front greeting people as they came in, and then they'd bring this person out to do various comedy gags, stuff that didn't show up on TV but would be done for the live audience in between tapings or things like that, where they had a guy in a Bigfoot suit come out. That was me. I was in a Bigfoot suit and did the worm in front of Joe V and an entire audience once. And in one spot where there was somebody standing up in the balcony to distract a couple of other wrestlers so Gangrel could get the drop on him, that was me. I was up there with the coat and the urn with my back turned, just... because at that time I was just the dude that was doing whatever I was told until I had a capacity on those shows. So I don't know if that's big enough, but
No, that works.
No, that works.
and yes, I did wrestle once in that Bigfoot suit, but only once, because by that time my wrestling wouldn't have been that great anyway. And once you put that suit on, it's kind of ghastly. It's hot. You can't see shit.
So, from the WCWC roster, who do you think promoters are missing out on today?
Missing out on today, man, that's a hard one. And we're talking the guys that came up through WCWC, not like the folks that were flying in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people I could pick, but I know a couple of them. Like I could say Malcolm Flex, but Malcolm Flex is on the rise. He's getting bigger shows, bigger shots, bigger companies. So I'm not going to say him because I don't know if he's being slept on. He's climbing that ladder, and I love to see it. If I were to pick somebody, I would say it's Troy Prescott, Pretty Boy. Troy is great at what he does. You give him something to do, and in some cases, you can give him something stupid to do, and he makes it work. And a lot of the comedy that he puts in, especially into his entrances, that's all him. Nobody is giving him any input. He'll make that stuff up as he goes, and it's funny as hell. And at the same time, skill-wise, he's just getting better, just getting better, just getting better. I don't think he ever stopped training. When WCWC closed down, when their school closed down, once COVID got done, he immediately started going to the Oregon Wrestling School up there in Beaverton, and I don't think he's ever stopped learning and stopped getting better. When a lot of other guys would start thinking, hey, we know enough, we don't have to train. Troy Prescott is out there training, and you can see him continuing to get better. He's a guy that a lot of promotions should be looking at and should be starting to book because, he'll make anybody look good, and that's important.
Could you tell us your feelings towards Ethan HD and Eric Wright?
Hate him. No, just kidding. Well, Ethan HD, that's a little harder for me to say because he and I were never like close. Yeah, we worked together, but there was a lot of times where we were both heels. I never was there, never was his manager, didn't talk a lot in the back rooms and the locker rooms. So, I think he's a decent enough wrestler. He's a decent enough guy. I'm not going to, sully his name. I just don't know him very well. So I can't say we're best of friends and then, oh yeah, he's a great guy. I just don't know him very well. But what I've seen in the ring, yeah, he's pretty good at what he does. Eric, though, I was there when he was a co-trainer at WCWC, worked him a bunch of times when I was a manager, worked him as cool heels. I was in his corner a bunch of times before Hellbound, when we were the ones getting bookings in different places as a group. And then, if you watched any any BCW last year, there was a big feud between Eric Wright and the Rat King that I was very physically involved with. Like I did more that summer in the ring than I probably had in years. Getting involved. I got hurt at one point. There was legit injury there. We kind of had to run with it because I was limited with what I could do for a bit. But it ended with a handicap match where I got a pin off Eric Wright. And I think he's now technically retired. And my appreciation for Eric Wright is immense. Even when we were against each other, his presence was great. He's one of the unsung heroes of the area. There are times I wish he would have gotten more from promoters and more from companies because he was a guy they could all rely on. And that's important. That's extremely important, being able to rely on somebody who will always be there, somebody who will always do his best, somebody who naturally just an idea can pop into his head and he can ad-lib something without really having to think about it, knowing that it's going to work. That's Eric Wright. And I will always appreciate, and I learned a lot from him too, because he was helping the WC school when I was learning to be a manager. So, I mean, he had input in what I do now too.
If you could work in the 4 major promotions or the top indie promotions, who would it be and why?
Is that a trick question? Okay, so I mean, honestly, most people might say WWE because of the money, but there are reasons that there are numerous reasons why I don't see ever going with them, even if they came and asked me. Just too many reasons. Some of them are personal reasons, some of them not so personal. If I were to have a choice, if the scheduling would be good, I could see me working with AEW. I mean, they do bring a lot of indie talents in. Some folks get overlooked, but a lot of guys, there get at least one good run. And it would be cool to be able to wrestle on to be able to manage on a national stage, at least a little bit before I'm done. And of course, amongst the choices that I have, they would probably be the ones that have the most reach. And I'm not going to lie, they pay. I mean, some of the other groups don't have as many viewers, don't have as many places to watch, and they don't pay as well. So if I'm not going to go with the WWE, AEW would be the next logical choice. Now, having said that, I'm not really trying to get on those national stages anymore. I know that my time in wrestling is probably in its final stages. I'm getting old.
Follow-up question to that. Have you ever had the chance to manage overseas? And if so, where?
No, I was a wrestler back then, so no, I haven't had that opportunity. There's been a couple times where the possibility came up, but it just wasn't right for one reason or another. And again, at this point, it's not something I'm seeking out. If a big enough opportunity popped in, especially if it was with the guys with Hellbound, I definitely would. But other than that, I don't see it happening. And I've never had that happen.
Was there anybody that you wanted to manage in the WCWC that you didn't get the chance to manage?
Oh, okay. That's a hard one. Woo. Actually, yeah, I can say that. Mind you, I managed one of these guys once, but it was kind of a thrown together thing, and they, I mean, this was a situation where I wasn't making the choices, so they decided not to run with that. But I would have loved to been in the corner of the Bonus Boys. I mean, those guys were good in the locker room. They were good out there with what they did. And there was a time when, what they were wearing and what I was wearing and how we were presenting ourselves matched. I mean, it just matched. And it would have been perfect. But in the long run, I never got that opportunity other than, like I said, managing Sugar Brown once in a match. I think it would have been a lot of fun if I'd ever been able to manage them as a tag team for a length of time. We would have worn the gold and we would have had the gold.
No doubt about that.
How did you get to manage what we think is the best faction in the Northwest today?
We're talking about Hellbound, right?
Yep.
Absolutely.
How did I get to manage them? Well, honestly, I think I kind of answered that earlier. Hellbound started when the Rat King was going to debut his new look, his new image, his new attitude down at Rumble in the Redwoods. And like I always have, if you guys have watched me long enough, you know that I take great strides to match whoever it is I'm managing. At times, like in WCWC, when I'm managing 3 or 4 guys, sometimes with different gimmicks, my look would change from show to show based entirely on who it was I was walking out of the curtain with. So when Rat King was making his debut, I was coming out with a new look as well. And it was a pretty good look. That was the first time I had the tailcoat, which I think is an excellent image to see me coming out as. So it started there. And it was only a couple months later when the match between Rat King and Petrov took place and the idea really got started. And it was only a few weeks after that when, we decided to bring Draven in. At that point, we were all talking about a faction. Once the idea that Petrov and Rat King could team up, and with me in their corner, it became an idea of being a faction and who else might fit and who else we were going to reach out to. Because we weren't going to wait for a booker or a promoter to tell us what we were doing with it. We were looking at who would fit best and who would present the best picture to a company to say, hey, this is why you want us on our show. This is what we can do for you. And I was there from day one. I didn't jump in as Hellbound was made. I was there in the car with Rat King going down to California when some of the ideas started to percolate. And believe me, some of our best ideas came up on road trips, on drives. Whether it was going down to California, whether it's Harbor Shores, Washington, wherever it is, we brainstorm. You get any number of us in a car together and we're brainstorming what we want to do next.
So, hey, Nathan, before you start your next question, Nathan, I know you asked the Rat King a question and it had something to do with Tubbs about a match at a trailer park. Did you want to get Tubbs' response to that?
Yes, the match where you fell into the pool with the duct tape in your back pocket.
Do you really have to bring that up? Yes.
I did, because I found that match extremely entertaining.
Well, of course it was extremely entertaining. I mean, we were in a trailer park. There was maybe 20, maybe 30 people there. It was hot. And of course I was still out there, and I don't think I was wearing the tailcoat that day, mostly because it was hot. And I mean, let's face it, we made most of that up as we went. We didn't. I mean, you know how wrestling is.
Yep.
They basically, a decision was made to leave the ring because every other match was staying in the ring. And that was when Troy Prescott, like I said, jumped off that damn storage container there onto the guy in the ring. I mean, I don't know if that was planned. Because as I remember, Rat King looked at that and said, I got to jump off of there. And then Troy did it first. But it was literally walking around and seeing what could be used to fight with. And me going into the pool was just a judgment decision. Because we were close to there and I wasn't wearing anything that could get damaged by water. So, and for a fat guy, I do know how to swim. That's literally all it was. Never done it before. Probably never do it again. I've got the clip in my collection because, I had to. Absolutely had to have that one.
What are the side trips that you and Hellbound boys are coming from shows? Like, I saw one where you guys were going to Ocean Shores or Harbor Shores and you went to like an amusement park. Can you tell us some of those stories?
I don't know about an amusement park. There's been different places. Let's see. I mean, Harbor Shores has a beach. So we go out on the beach almost every time we're up there just to pal around and, have fun. Petrov was bit by a seagull at one point. Seagull didn't know how to work. The last time we were up there, you probably saw the pictures if you were paying attention. There was some big driftwood, like a big tree.
Yeah.
That had been swept out to sea and brought back in with all these branches. And somebody had come along since it had been there and had carved faces into it. So, of course, we saw that and we're like, oh, we got to take some pictures and video. I mean, almost everybody who was at that show that saw that took some pictures and video. Northman, Ernest Olson took some video there too. I mean, it was a natural. There was faces in the wood. I can't tell you many of the. Oh God. Oh, okay. You want a road trip story? And
Yeah.
Sorry if this embarrasses you, Doc, but this was before Hellbound. So I mean, I'm just gonna say this story because it's funny. But this was before Hellbound. This was actually even. I think it was before Cool Heels. I was going to be in the corner of 4 Minutes of Heat down at Rumble in the Redwoods. But as we're coming back, I think it was as we were coming back, there were 7 of us in that car, okay? We were crammed in that vehicle. And one of them was Eddie Pearl and one of them was Doc Cleaver. So, I mean, they're not small guys. Very tall, very tall. And they were happen to be the guys I'm sitting next to. I'm on the left, Eddie was in the middle, Doc was on the right. Now, our driver at the time was having fun with music. Some of the choices that were being made. Now, at this particular moment, Doc is asleep, trying to get some shut-eye. And the driver puts on a song that I had never heard of in my life. And sorry out there, folks, if you don't like cursing, but it was Papa Smurf, Can I Lick Your Ass? Look it up. It's a real song.
I know.
Yeah. I know. So I don't remember which one of us looked first, but as the song's playing, Eddie and I both turn and look at Doc. And we're watching his expression, and he's over there just. What the fuck? I mean, just out of a sound sleep, you see his whole face just like crunch. I'm always gonna remember that because it's natural. I mean, how else are you gonna respond to a song like that you wake up to and you've never heard before?
No, that's a pretty natural response.
Yeah, I mean, before I looked at Doc, I was sitting there listening to this song like, what the fuck? It's like, who wrote this? Who thought of this as a song to write? So yeah, that was a road trip story. Nothing to do with Hellbound, but there you go. One of my favorite road trips with Hellbound, and I'm not going to say much about the show itself, but well, I did wrestle on it. So, but anyway, coming back from Utah, we're right at the border between, or was it Utah, Idaho? Whatever the hell, yeah.
Yeah.
Right up there between Washington and Idaho. And we didn't know it, but we took a different way there and then took a different way back. And as we're coming back, I had never seen it in all my travels in the area, but there's like a sort of mock-up Stonehenge on the Columbia River. And we saw it from a distance. And at that point, we were coming home, so we could stop wherever we wanted to. And so we stopped and checked it out. I made a video there. It's just a standing stone structure in a circle overlooking the Columbia River. And it was pretty cool. I mean, I like stuff like that. And it kind of blew my mind that it's been sitting there. And I had no knowledge that it existed. And now, of course, at some point, I'm going to have to go back. Whether it's a wrestling trip or non-wrestling trip, I'm going to have to go see it again. It was cool.
Oh.
What advice would you give an aspiring wrestler?
Aspiring wrestler?
Yeah.
Now, my wrestling career wasn't exactly the most stellar. I mean, I had some good moments, but I would love to say that I was great, but I wasn't great. I didn't spend enough time in it. I would not compare me at my best to any of the guys I'm with right now. But for somebody getting in first, I would say what everybody's going to say, safety first, and then don't get big-headed. Always watch. Always listen. There's always something to learn. Don't ever think you know everything, because if you think you know everything and you don't think there's anything left to learn, you're jaded and you might as well leave. Always keep your ears open, and especially if there's somebody there who's done more than you have. I've seen some pretty stupid things said by young chucklehead wrestlers who were getting big on themselves while there were bigger names in a room with them, and I've seen a few of them dressed down for it too.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna reword this one a little bit. I know personally that Draven Vargas is a prankster because I was on the other end of those a couple of times. Has he tried to pull, or any Hellbound for that matter, tried to pull any pranks in the back?
That's a hard one, because honestly, I know this is a strange thing to say. I don't know if it's because I'm older than most of the locker room nowadays, and have been for a while, but I haven't had very many actual pranks done to me. Although we were talking about Marcus Malone earlier, he got me good a couple times. But anyway, like I left my phone at one of the conventions we were at, and there were some interesting photos on it when I got back. And wearing my jackets and wearing my hats and with my cigar back in those days. But as far as Draven and the guys, man, nothing really comes to mind. I know they've done things, and especially Draven. Petrov can too, but usually if I hear something from Draven that I know of for sure, it's his saying something to somebody during a match in the ring, trying to get them to crack up, trying to get them to start laughing or taking them off their game. Because he'll do it, and he's good at it. I think a lot of wrestlers will try, but Draven's pretty good at that. Just like getting somebody into a hold and then saying something to them that'll make them lose it.
Well, really quick, I'll tell you the worst prank he ever pulled on me. We were up at Tito's in Hillsboro at the flea market up there. And Draven was tag team partners with one of my caregivers. Because we went to the same training school and they both trained together. And they told me that they needed me to hold a cookie sheet behind my back in my wheelchair. But they didn't tell me they were in the main event, which was 3 hours later after the show started. So then he comes out, and Tito's crowd was majority were Mexican, right? So Draven comes out and with a bottle of water in his hand, pours the bottle of water over his head and goes, "There, I'm a wetback, just like you guys," and points at me and laughs like I'm part of the story. I thought I was gonna die.
Cool.
Okay.
Did you always know you wanted to be involved in wrestling? And if not, what was your other chosen profession?
Well, I mean, I don't think I've ever been big enough to call wrestling my profession. I mean, admittedly, since coming back from COVID, I have made more money than I've spent, which is nice. You know, I've actually made a little bit this time around, but I don't know if I could call it a profession. I've dabbled in acting. I've dabbled in writing. If I ever was able to do what I really wanted to do when I was young, though, it would have been writing. I used to have a lot of aspirations. I still do some writing, although it's private and personal nowadays. I'm not trying to sell novels or things like that, not unless something in my motivation changed a great deal, but it is still there. There was a time when I really wanted to write comic books, like superhero stories, DC, Marvel, that kind of stuff. And I had that since I was like 10 years old and kept trying till my mid-30s. And That's the main things. I mean, what I've actually done with my life, there's a lot of practical jobs I've done. Right now, I drive, and I'm good at driving because I got a hell of a driving record. No pun intended.
If you could pick one person and or team in the WWE, AEW to manage, who would it be and why?
That is a very, very good question. Because you got to realize that nowadays, being part of wrestling for so long, my answers are not going to be what a lot of fans' answers are. Like, I'm not going to jump in there and say, oh, you know, this big guy that's at the top of his game right now, I want to manage him. Because essentially they're already there. What would be the point? What would I bring to that? I'm going to think of who actually could use somebody like me in their corner. So based on what I know, because I'm not 100% up on everything going on in like WWE, AEW right now, but somebody like Omos, he's new. He's kind of still green. He's somebody outside who knows what they're doing, who could actually, you know, send messages, because I've done that an awful lot in training schools. And I mean, you guys, if you followed me long enough before Hellbound and before Cool Heels, I was in the corner of so many young guys just coming out of training. There were reasons for that. I wasn't just a play manager. I was telling guys messages like, don't forget what you're doing. Say something to the audience. Don't just stand there, stupid. I would do it in the language of, you know, being the role of manager, but actually say things that people needed to hear. So I was in a lot of guys' corner when they were first starting because I could guide them. So anybody in AEW or WWE, I would be looking at some of those folks who like weren't in the indies for 20 years before they got to WWE and who aren't out there already doing everything they need to do. Somebody that I could actually help and assist and help sort of aim them where they need to be aimed.
What was it like getting pushed into the pool during that trailer park match?
It was
They already
wet.
asked.
Okay.
It was what?
I still had my shoes on.
Ooh.
Follow up to that though is, how did the duct tape stay in your pocket?
Yes.
That I don't know. I mean, I think I literally just forgot that was still there until we needed it. I mean, when clothes gets wet, it like grabs on. So, I mean, once my pants were wet, I don't think anything was going to slip out of there. And of course, I'm not dumb enough to have like my wallet and stuff during a match. That'd be stupid.
That's true.
Or a phone. I get bounced around too much for that.
Before we ask our next question, we want to thank our second sponsor, Bruce Nichols Painting, for all your painting needs. Lead removal and pressure washing. To find him, you can look him up on Angie's. You've already answered partly this, but other than managing, have you done any other jobs in professional wrestling?
I'd have to try to think of what I haven't done. When I first started training back in 1997, I ran camera for several shows. You know, because revealing some of the great secrets of wrestling here, folks, peeling behind the curtain. But at the time, I had 2 VCRs. So I would run the camera, and then I would take the main tape home, and I would make copies. Back in the old days of VHS.
Mm-hmm.
My first official job was commentary. Besides that, I did some interview stuff and then commentary. I actually, on YouTube somewhere, I have an ancient from like 98 or 99, a very young looking me with a totally different name. interviewing a very young-looking Rhino. And very amateur from my point of view, because they just told me to start doing interviews, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So it's not a good interview. I did the commentary. I did a commissioner before I ever wrestled a match. That led into my first actual matches. I've done announcing. I've done some things in the background. I've done a little bit of agenting. I would have liked to have done more of that, but opportunities of more than a few times there were just people that were, more experienced than that I was, so I wasn't the first choice. Let's see. Yeah, I've done a lot of different things. I've been one of those guys who, if there's a need that I can fill, I'll jump in. So, there are shows out there that I never wrestled on, never managed on, but I did like announcing for several shows. Because I can do the announcing voice. Coming out to the ringside, here is blah, 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 and his brother, blah, blah.
Who is the better?
Because honestly, I'm not into those headaches.
Who is the better wrestler turned actor?
The best wrestler turned actor?
Yes.
Gosh, that's a little bit of a hard one. That really is a hard one because there are so many of them that, some of them weren't as good an actor, but they got the right roles with the right directors. I wouldn't say Andre the Giant was a great actor. But goddamn, The Princess Bride.
Oh, yeah.
Freaking excellent movie. And Weiner got the best out of every single person in that movie. Bar none. He drew the best he could out of everybody. But I couldn't see just anybody directing Andre the Giant and him being a great actor. In an overall sense, gosh, that's a hard one. I think I would have to say Roddy Piper. Because just off the top of my head, I can think of 2 or 3 things that he did where he was really excellent in, and they weren't movies with great directors and great casts necessarily, but he could hold his own. He was in a couple bad ones too, I'll admit that. I'm watching John Cena because he's had a bunch of stuff and some of them have been pretty mediocre, but then what he did in Peacemaker had me rolling, and it was all very good. That could have been because James Gunn was the director, but if John Cena can do more of that in different roles, he would very quickly become probably my favorite. Because that Peacemaker was, I thought it was awesome. If he could do that in different roles, different types of shows and movies, that would say a lot.
So a follow up to that question, I actually did my research on. I do my research on old TV shows. I found out that Andre the Giant was in the $6 Million Man episode.
Yeah, he was Sasquatch.
Yeah.
He was the original Sasquatch. I've got pictures of that in my computer somewhere of him and Lee Majors standing next to each other while filming that.
Oh.
I remember watching that as a kid. See, I just aged myself. I told you.
Yep, he did.
I watched $6 Million Man when it was first on TV. Not syndication, not cable. And I remember I didn't know Andre the Giant was Bigfoot then, but that's because I didn't know who Andre the Giant was yet. But even back then, let's face it, if you didn't know any other wrestlers, you knew Andre the Giant. He was on dozens of TV shows.
So we've talked about that you and I have, an acquaintance in common in Draven. So can you tell us how you guys met and maybe one story that we might not know from your end, and then I'll tell you the one I was going to tell you that we talked about earlier.
Let me see. It's not when I met Draven, but one of the first times I got to work directly with him, I mean, for the fact that I'd been around for a while and Draven had been around for a while, we didn't really cross paths hardly at all for several years. When I finally actually did some work directly with him, it was at an unusual show at, I think, the Paris Theater. And I worked with him a couple times. We kind of just crossed paths several times, so we had to do a lot of talk that day. And remember that Bigfoot suit that I was telling you about? Well, on that show, he actually wore it to interfere in a match. Because for some reason, the people running it at the time didn't trust me to do what was needed, which I thought was weird because I could have. But at the time, Draven was definitely more physically fit than I was. That was back when I was larger. So he did the Bigfoot and ran out there and interfered in my Bigfoot suit. And yes, it was clean.
And knowing Draven, he probably took some enjoyment out of that on some level.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, before that, we had only crossed paths once or twice. And that was when I was dealing with 3 minutes of heat and we were dealing with like higher 5. Whoa, excuse me. Ad-libbing.
So the story I have, he's probably going to kill me about when he sees this or hears that I told you this.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. So please tell. Yeah. So please tell him the story, and then tell Mr. Tubbs the story about why you have to wear a dress for a Mariners game too while you're at it. So you don't do stories.
Yes, I'll throw that part in too. So you know how Draven likes to challenge people to do things?
Yes.
Right, just to get a rise out of them. So he challenged me to wear a bra for an hour. So I wanted to challenge him back. So his wife at the time, his girlfriend at the time, his wife now, had a Catholic schoolgirl outfit, and they were at my house. So I told Draven that if I wore a bra for an hour, then he would have to dress like a Catholic schoolgirl for the rest of the night while we played Halo. I wore a bra for an hour, but he made one ugly Catholic schoolgirl for the rest of that night. Now, the reason I have to wear a dress to a Mariners game is because I made the stupid mistake of betting that I could guess all the matches to WrestleMania.
Uh-oh.
100% right. Which I didn't. So now I have to wear a dress when we go to a Mariners game in August.
Groovy.
Yes. But the thing is, and I've told everybody this, I might have to wear a dress, but I'm going to make that thing look good.
We already discussed this one, so I'm going to change it a little. What is your favorite TV show that a wrestler guest starred on?
Wow. That is a hard one because I'm probably going to forget a few that I have seen in the past. Not a wrestler. Actually, I've got it. This is a clip that's so hard to find. I eventually could only find it on the Internet Archive. Even their official sources where you can stream it have this particular sketch taken out. But in the 80s, Saturday Night Live had Hulk Hogan and Mr. T on the show. And they had this whole sketch where Billy Crystal was doing his Fernando character and interviewing the two of them as they were preparing for WrestleMania. And if you've ever seen Mr. T in interviews and various things that were kind of live or semi-live, dude sometimes had a hard time keeping a straight face when he was dealing with comedians. And so he broke. And Billy Crystal kept working him and kept working him and kept working him to where Mr. T could hardly speak. And after a couple minutes, Hogan started to break. Just watching Mr. T cracking up. And that's probably got to be my favorite wrestler appearance of all time. I mean, Saturday Night Live, it was live TV. So they were being watched all across the United States while Mr. T could not keep in character throughout that comedy sketch and couldn't stop laughing. And if you've ever heard Mr. T laugh, it's like, I mean, it's a very high-pitched, fast laugh. And I think that's what eventually got Hogan going. And you could see Billy Crystal would like smirk every time he got him. He'd say something, Mr. T would lose it, and he'd just be over there. And it's a great sketch. It's like too bad that it's so hard to find. I'm assuming there's some rights issue that made them take it off their official streaming sources. Like maybe Marvel owning the Hulk name or something. I don't know.
Okay. What is the craziest thing you've ever seen in a wrestling match?
Oh, gravy trains. Oh, let me see. Well, I want to think of something that doesn't happen a lot. Because I've seen some crazy stuff. I'm going to give you two. One older, one newer. Back when I was in my early days, there was one show where I was special referee. This was when I was the commissioner of the first place I worked and hadn't wrestled a match yet, wasn't ready. Technically, I wasn't ready to wrestle when I wrestled my first match, but that's beside the point. I was doing special referee in a big kind of, if I remember correctly, it was supposed to be a no rules match. So I was in there just to count the three after the other referee got knocked out. And the problem is there was one spot of the ring about yay big, maybe. It's not very big, just like 6 inches or so, where there was a small piece of exposed metal. So one of the wrestlers gets whipped over the top rope and hits that. Split up here on his scalp that just starts bleeding down. And it wasn't planned. They weren't going to, blade or anything like that. And as the referee, and the fact that I'm new, but I still had some idea what I was doing, I ask a lot of questions, and I know that there are times when you have to step in. So while I'm basically there only to count the pinfall, the other wrestler keeps giving me moments so I could go in there and say, "Are you good? Do you need to stop? You're bleeding really badly right now." And to his credit, he would not stop the match. I got to look at the gash in his head, and it's like a good inch and a half, 2 inches long, and just blood coming down one side of his face. But he saw that match through to the end, and then went back to the back and super glued it. I mean, And then as far as stuff that didn't go wrong, so to speak, something that actually was meant to happen was, some of you guys might have been there, might have seen the video, I don't know. DOA, first time I ever met Funny Bone at the Boys and Girls Club up there in Portland, climbing up on top of the basketball hoop and doing a flip dive onto like 20 guys. I mean, technically, there were too many guys out there, and some of them shouldn't have been out there to begin with. They let some people who weren't even on the show be out there. But it was still a good spot. I mean, as far as fan-pleasing type of stuff, I mean, I'll give Funny Bone full marks. He knows how to make fans go home happy. And yes, that whole thing was like pretty incredible to me.
But now it's like refined. The refined sparkle that's coming through.
Who was your favorite client to manage?
That's a trick question because you want to turn people against me now. Outside of the guys that I'm working with now, because like I said, I've been around Rat King for 8 to 9 years now. So I mean, I'm not sure I can not say him. But as far as strictly working together, guy that I didn't travel with exactly, guy that I mostly only saw on the shows. It's Maxwell Chicago. Maxwell Chicago legit is the funniest person I ever worked with. And if do any of you remember him from WCWC?
Yes.
Lounge singer gimmick. He had tights, but they looked kind of like a tuxedo, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
75% of the funny things he did in his matches were off the top of his head.
Wow.
Most of the things that he did with me that were funny were improv. We didn't plan crap when it came to the funny things we did. It just happened. And he taught me, I mean, I thought I was a funny guy out in the ring and around the ring, but he taught me how to just come up with an idea and run with it before you've even had a chance to think about it and make it funny and get people against you or on your side. And he had so many things in locked up in his brain, even spots that he did do regularly. I mean, he had this spot where he would climb up to the second rope, try to climb up to the third rope, decide against that, get ready to do a move, think twice, go down to the first rope, and then jump off of that. And then usually miss because at that point he didn't have enough room to actually hit the guy. So he'd fall short. And that's something he did every few months, and it was funny. Dude was hilarious. And I miss Max. I missed working with Max almost as soon as I stopped working with Max. That is a hard question because I've worked with a lot of really good guys. I mean, there are so many of them I could name.
So Hellbound has some very creative members in it, individually. So when you guys get ready to do like a promo, is it more of a collective group, like when you guys do the group promos, or?
It depends on the promo. So many promos that we do together, they come up one of two ways. Either A, we need to do a promo, and so we just come up with something real quick, or one of us has an idea. And we've all had ideas that we ran with. You've seen some of them can be quite immersive, where we have to do a setup and have to go to the right place and do it at the right time so that we have certain things involved. And others are just us being like, okay, what can we do? And then we make it funny. There was one we did for, I think, the first Harbor Shores, which was completely off the cuff. All we knew is when it was happening, where it was happening, who we were wrestling. That was it. We found a cool place, and we just ran with it. That's all it takes sometimes. Sometimes we'll film something off the top of our head that isn't even a promo. There was some goofy thing we did after watching a show ourselves where we actually went to something as Hellbound, but we weren't involved with it. It wasn't a wrestling show. We just went there as friends watching something. And afterwards, we did this funny thing where basically I started talking about my inhaler like it was marijuana, like it was pot. Saying how you have to take a puff and you have to hold it in or it won't be as effective. You can't exhale right away. That's literally something we just decided to film, and it was all whatever we thought of spur of the moment. That's why it's great working with so many guys who can be so creative and so inventive in the spur of the moment. It's really the best way to do it because, I mean, promos, some guys can plan everything and just rattle it out and make it look good. A lot of people can't.
All right, the next question I have is who can cut a better promo between MJF and The Miz?
Jesus Christ, dude. Why are you going to make me choose between them? I mean, they're both great. And, I mean, both of them have done stuff that weren't as great, but generally speaking, they're usually right on the money. I would probably give it to The Miz only because I've seen more of his promos. I have watched some of MJF's promos, so I'm familiar with his style and what he does. But I was watching The Miz for many years before I knew who MJF was. So I'll give it to The Miz only for that. Because I've seen many dozens of his promos where MJF, I've seen some. But they're both good. They're both highly entertaining.
What did we just say to you? Your talent is
So, what was the toughest match to date that Hellbound's had?
Pardon?
What's the toughest match to date that Hellbound's had? Like the toughest opponent.
That's a loaded question, man. That's a loaded question.
Hey, I'll tell you this: if this gets you in any kind of trouble, I'll go with you to a show. I'm in a wheelchair; they can't fight me.
Yes, but Draven knows you.
That's true. I might be in trouble on that front too.
Let's see. Toughest match. I mean, as a group, gosh, we might have to go to another question because I don't know if I can give you a good answer for that. I mean, you got to realize if I consider toughest opponents, it wasn't because they were tough. It's because they couldn't work or didn't know what they were doing or messed up bad in some way. So I think I have to plead the fifth. You know, my attorney tells me not to answer that question.
That's a good answer, honestly.
Understandable.
That's a great answer, honestly.
Okay, here's another tough one for you. Who, between these two wrestlers, who has the better entrance theme? John Cena or Chris Jericho?
I guess it depends on which entrance theme, but I would go with Jericho. I mean, I know everybody knows John Cena's because he was the big hero and stuff, but yeah, I was never the biggest fan of his anyway. I mean, it's recognizable, but a lot of wrestlers are recognizable. Jericho's I liked.
Yeah, I love Jericho's because it's part of his band.
Somebody watching TV?
No, I live in a nursing home and I share a room with my mom, and it's a commercial. So those are always, a little bit louder than the actual show.
Okay. Just tell them to keep the porn down, all right?
I told my mom that I wouldn't be sharing the room anymore.
That's why I said it.
I know that's why you said it. So we asked you earlier what advice you would give a wrestler. What advice would you give an inspiring manager?
Well, you remember when you asked me about what I learned from the grappler? That's probably the biggest thing I would tell them. Again, with a lot of people who aren't trained well, sometimes they get in the way, and a lot of times they're doing stuff when they should not be. And the worst managers are the ones that are out there thinking that they want to be part of the show. This might surprise you because I know that in the Pacific Northwest, somewhere along the way, a lot of people consider me one of the best managers that there has been around. I'm not sure I always agree, but I've heard it from enough people that I have to at least give them some credence to it. And you just see a lot of people, you notice I've never tried to make it about Al Tubbs. When I'm out there with a wrestler, it's about them. It's about the match they're about to do. It's about that storyline. It's usually not about me unless somehow the storyline is about me. And if the storyline isn't about me, I'm not going out there to make myself the star. I've seen managers try that. I've seen managers that didn't know where their place was in the pecking order and who detracted from a match because they were doing too much or doing the wrong kind of stuff or bringing the attention to themselves when they shouldn't have been. A manager's out there to enhance what's happening, not take away from it. And any manager who's going to spend any amount of time as a manager needs to know that the show isn't about them. Don't make yourself the star. The only time where there's an exception is if you've got somebody who's already a big name coming into a smaller show, then they get to do that. And I'm going to tell you something. Of the guys that I've worked with who were names when it comes to managing, or the guys that I was able to watch or have anything to do with, the two I can think of most didn't make the shows or the matches about them. But we're talking big name managers who had done far more than I ever have. Percy Pringle, I was on 2 shows with him. He's a name that could have made it about himself if he could have demanded things. But he did not. He went out there and he did what he needed to do as perfectly as you could want him to do it. And he didn't go out there thinking that the show or the matches were about Percival Pringle III. If he's going to do that, then some small-time guy who isn't even fully trained and barely knows what he's doing should definitely not be going out there trying to make the show about them or trying to make their name big. Your name's going to be big if it becomes big, but you don't make it that way. Very few wrestlers make that happen. It happens because they're good at what they do.
I don't have any other questions.
Actually, I have one more because I've done some commentary also. Can you tell the fans out there that might not know how a commentator helps, guide the story?
Well, I'll tell you how it's supposed to go. I'm going to tell you sometimes it doesn't. The big companies, the WWEs, the AEWs, the Ring of Honors, they have professionals who have been usually doing it for a long time. And on smaller levels, sometimes it's a completely different thing. A lot of shows don't have commentary. Some of them have live commentary. Some people like it. Some people hate it. It's a different thing. And sometimes, depending on the show, it can be very different what the style is. Like around here, doing something for BCW would be different than what you do for Anarcho Pro, because they're going to be very different shows. Or Metal Mania. To me, though, for your basic wrestling shows, whether it's older school or new school, we're talking not like the Metal Manias where there's a specific thing going on, a specific kind of audience. For a wrestling audience, you have to focus on what's going on in the ring. You don't want to go off on side tangents too much. You don't want to just talk about talk. And if there is a storyline or something that needs to be put out, you need to be on top of putting that information out. Those times I've done commentary, I went to every wrestler and I went to every match if I could. Sometimes you don't have the opportunity, but if I could, I would go and I would ask them what information they needed me to put out, and I would find out what the aim of the match was. Because what I'm going to say about a scientific match isn't the same that I'm going to say about a hardcore match, which isn't the same that I'm going to say about a tag team match. And you really, sometimes it's about explaining to fans what's going on without being too obvious about it. And please know some of what you're doing. I've worked with guys who kept getting names of moves wrong. Somebody does a power slam and they say a power bomb. And I'm doing that over and over and over again for different moves. And I made it a joke once to correct a person, like doing a Bobby Heenan monsoon. He'd say the wrong one. I'm like, no, that's a power bomb, my friend. No, that was a drop kick. Thank you. Yeah, commentary, it's depending on the show, sometimes it's not important and sometimes it's really important. And the worst thing I usually see is when they go off on some tangent that isn't helping the match. You have somebody watching a match between wrestler A and wrestler B, and they spend 2 minutes talking about wrestler C who's not involved, but going to be on later in the show. Well, that's nice, but whoever's watching that on YouTube or at home or wherever might not see that match later in the night. So you just wasted 2 minutes of time on something that they may never see while stuff is going on that they may not get or that you can be enhancing. And for me, it's all about reaction. I've heard people, doing their commentary like this, and they're just talking like this, sometimes slurring their words. And I'm doing commentary. I'm like, oh my God, he just power bombed him. I think his head bounced off the mat. I can't believe this is happening. I'll get into it. I try to get the people, if I'm sounding like what just happened is the worst thing I've seen in a while, people at home are going to be invested. Or, at home, YouTube, whatever it is, I haven't exactly done commentary for 5 million people on TV or anything. Yes, that's what I would say. I think I said about 4 different things there, but
No, that was a great answer. I think the easiest match at the training school that I ever called was the match of 1,000 nut shots, which ironically Draven was in also.
That doesn't surprise me.
Mainly because the whole commentary for that match was, well, he hit him in the nuts again. Well, they used the croquet mallet this time, or the salad tongs, or the bowling ball, or...
In Cool Heels, we did a promo like that. Anyway.
It was very entertaining to call just because you were like, I don't know what they're going to use next, so I'm just going to gotta go with it.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with commentary, but WCWC for a couple years had their 24-hour Christmas shows. And so what that meant is like anywhere between like midnight to 5 a.m., almost anything goes because there was usually not many people there and it was all for charity. And there was one match that even though technically I was their manager, I had no purpose being out there. So I literally brought out a bag of popcorn and sat in the front row and watched it because it was when Rat King and at the time Eddie Pearl were doing a Yuletide death match. And they just had various things of Christmassy type that had been purchased at a dollar store, tubes of wrapping paper, pine cones, just various Christmassy things. And they literally just wailed on each other for 10 to 15 minutes with them. Now, if you ever mentioned this match to Rat King, yeah, it's not one of his favorite memories, but it was a thing to watch. And doing commentary for that would have been kind of awesome, I have to admit. And as far as I know, the footage has never come out, so there's no place to watch this.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that because one of our first interviews when this started going pretty good was with the Rat King, and he did mention that match.
Did he?
He did. The cellophane from the wrapping paper and how much that hurt when, they hit you with that stuff. So
yeah, it's surprisingly solid when it's wrapped tight in plastic. There's no give.
And you're right. He said that with the most mean scowl on his face, like he was reliving it as he was, So.
Oh yeah.
But you see how memorable that match was.
Yep.
I keep telling him he needs to do it again someday. I'm sure you know what the answer always is.
Yep. No.
Usually it's to the tune of "God damn it, Tubbs."
So with that, is there anything you want to promote that you might have coming up?
There's a few things. This next Friday, you might have to look up the address online, but this Friday in Milwaukee, Pacific Northwest Blue Collar Wrestling is going to have their show on Saturday. Doors open at 6. Rat King is going to be against Charlie Avell, who's been running over a lot of people over there at DOA. Tag team with Drexel. That's going to be a good match, and there's going to be several other good matches during that show. Some of the folks that are there, Wade and Dominic Hess are there. Oh, goodness. JB Moonshine, a lot of local guys who can do a lot of great things. That's coming up there. And I believe I might have to get back on somebody, or they might have to look it up online, but I believe Anarco is going to be doing a show in May as well.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, those are the two that I'm pretty sure I'll be involved with.
Sounds good. Well, we want to thank you for coming on tonight and sharing some amazing stories and some laughs.
All right, I've got one personal story I want to share before we go.
Okay, sounds good.
Absolutely.
Because there's one point in my my time as a wrestler that I always come back to. And I don't know why. It's just a personal thing, I guess. There was a show I was doing for a lucha show. Yes, for a while there, Al Tubbs somehow was doing managing at lucha shows. But it's because they had some American style matches there too. Now there was a match where, it was supposed to be one of those classic things. I get knocked off the ring apron, right? Problem is, as I'm doing something that I've done 1,000 times, my foot hooked on the apron just a little bit. So that when I hit the wood floor, there was just a fraction of an inch of my face that hit before the rest of my body.
Oh.
So basically, now, and this was the end of the match. So basically, at the time, I felt it, but I didn't feel it, if you know what I mean. There was no concussion, nothing like that. I know that I had hit and it hurt, but it wasn't like I felt something was broken or whatever. So I do what I normally do. The match ended. I crawled back and noticed that I had a goose egg up on my forehead that was coming up very, very fast. Now, I've done a lot of things in life, so I know, goose eggs and stuff. I've had a few before I ever got into wrestling, and I know when they're dangerous and when they're not. Didn't have any signs of a concussion, didn't have anything that felt like anything was broken, knew I was probably going to have a black eye and just had this huge lump coming up on my forehead. So what did I do? I went out during intermission because the whole idea was that, my client had knocked me off of the apron. So I go walking out there like this, and people would laugh at me and say, "Ha ha, Tubbs." And then I'd do this and be like, "You're sick laughing at me," with this gigantic lump on my head. And the expression every single time I moved my hand was like, I had to fight not to laugh, because at that point it didn't even hurt, but I'm just like, what do you think? How you feeling, Tubbs? It hurts. And people would just be like, and then they'd be all concerned. And at that point I knew I was safe. And yeah, fun times. But I am lucky that it wasn't worse. If it had been another inch or two off, my head and face could have hit a lot harder than it did. It was just a little bit where the face went. Well, thank you guys for having me on the show tonight. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
No problem. And you're welcome back anytime.
Cool.
So
We said this to the Rat King. Maybe one of these days we get all 4 members of Hellbound.
Oh, you're asking for trouble there.
Well, I know I've been trying to get Draven on for a while, but you haven't been able to do it yet.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I'd have to tune into that one.
So, with that being said, thank you to Mr. Tubbs for being our guest tonight. And in closing, please help control the pet population. Have your host spaded or neutered. Peace out.
And save the world and have